your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. This is the Atheist Manifesto. Hello, dear friends, and welcome to the Atheist Manifesto. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined once more by my fabulous co-host, Ari Stillman. What's up, Ari?
I have a question about gay marriage.
Yeah, I am in one of those now, so I'm an expert.
So are you now Mrs. Celeste Dreyer, and she is now Mrs. Callie Wright? Is that how that works?
You know, I don't think we figured that out. That was actually a conversation that we had with Bobby before the wedding. He was like, so do I now pronounce you wife and wife? Do I pronounce you woman and woman? Do I pronounce and then what he initially came up with is I now pronounce y'all. And I was okay with that. He actually used I now pronounce y'all married, which is I'm good with that too. It works for me.
Yeah, that
way,
works too. But I'm just saying, back in the old-timey days, the wife used to have to be referred to as, Mr. John Smith. So you are now Mrs. Celeste Dreyer. That's you.
Yeah. I mean, that's just another way that the gays are just completely fucking up traditional marriage, right? We don't even know what words to call things. It's a mess. Oh, nobody come back? Ari? Okay.
No.
All right. Cool. I guess we can actually move on to the episode now. So.
All right. Now that my question has been somewhat answered by the gays ruined it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's fair. I think that's the answer for pretty much everything involving the gays. So when I say the words college campus and free speech, what comes to mind? If you're like me, it's a deep-seated desire to throw shit. Some of the most intractable and frustrating discussions I've seen and had recently are discussions around the idea of who we do and don't give platforms to, and this is obviously played out on college campuses, and we've of course also seen it in the conference circuit around the conference who shall not be named. I read a super interesting article recently on the topic by our guest Amanda Marcotte. Amanda is a politics writer for Salon.com and author of the upcoming book Troll Nation: How the Right Became Trump-Worshipping Monsters, set on rat-fucking liberals, America, and the truth itself, which is a fantastic title, I gotta say. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Thank my editor for that. He insisted on it.
Well, yeah, your editor's good. I dig it. So the article that you wrote that sort of inspired this conversation is called Progressives Can Win the Free Speech Debate, but Not by Fighting on the Right's Turf. And I'm going to have a link in the show notes for folks who want to read the whole thing. But for the purpose of framing the discussion, would you mind just sort of laying out the TLDR version?
So, I've been watching with interest this whole situation where, conservative groups on campuses, especially private liberal arts campuses, will invite provocative that's a nice word for white nationalists or otherwise bigoted speakers, and, get a reaction out of left-wing groups on campus that either demand that the administration not allow that speaker to speak, or meet the speaker with protests that are so loud and disruptive that it makes it difficult for the speaker to speak. So, And inevitably what happens when this happens is that the right-wing media goes nuts. I mean, the New York Times has been obsessed with this for, all their conservative columnists have had a dozen op-eds about this situation. And a bunch of liberal commentators, especially older people, will wring their hands and wonder if the kids these days have become illiberal or left-wing authoritarians. And frankly, I feel like the whole thing allows the right to score points and paint the left as censorious and authoritarian when there's no actual broad evidence that that is true. And in fact, is kind of faintly ridiculous in an era when we have an actual authoritarian right-wing president. Does that succinctly sum up the situation?
Yeah, I think that's good. And what's interesting to me about this debate is I was doing a lot of reading on this, trying to figure out, the scope. And there's actually, the name escapes me at the moment, but there's a libertarian think tank that tries to keep track of no platforming demands where these speakers get booked. And so yeah. And my understanding is that the last 2 years it's gone down, and it's trending downward this year as well. So I think we can probably all agree that the debate itself is a bit hyperbolic in that we're debating a concept that doesn't really exist. But the debate obviously does have broader implications, right? Because like you're saying, it often allows them to win the story, right? They get sympathy because the conversation turns to the authoritarian left and people not being allowed to speak instead of what they're actually saying. So the thing that's hard for me with this is that, we talk about trolling, right? And trolling is 100% something that these folks do. But in my mind, trolling is a tactic, right? Because so many of these people do actually believe all of the bigoted shit that they're saying. They're framing it in a sort of trolly way, like, 4chan and, drumming it up to get a reaction and that kind of stuff. But I think most of the time they do actually believe this stuff. So where it's difficult for me is if it were purely trolling and like, these people aren't serious. Nobody's taking them seriously. They're not actually accomplishing anything. Like literally their entire purpose is to get a reaction. It would be really, really easy for me to just kind of set it aside. But so many of these people, like Richard Spencer, people are taking this guy seriously, and he's very serious about what he says. Now, there's a strategy where they are trying to drum up this sympathy around the free speech debate, but he's serious about white nationalism and the ethno state and all of that. And so that leaves me a little conflicted with how to deal with it.
Yeah, and I think that conflict is real, and the right is exploiting it. But what I've noticed, and as this goes on, and I mentioned this in the article, is that they know that they can't defend their arguments on their merits, that an actual debate about their arguments is one they will lose. I think Richard Spencer, as much as he believes it, is keenly aware that trying to have a debate about white people being superior or whatever it is he believes is one he's going to lose, right? And I think that, same thing with, what's her name, the Christina Hoff Sommers, who's kind of a similar thing like that, but anti-feminist, makes these trolly arguments about how women's like lack of pay, the pay gap and other situations are, she won't say because women are inferior, but that's just generally the point that she's trying to make. And, Charles Murray was somebody else who got caught up in one of these debates. He has written a book where he argued that Black people are inherently inferior intellectually. So these are all bad arguments. I think that's the thing that's really clear. And so what they want to do is find a mechanism to forward their arguments and to popularize their brand, right, without actually having to engage the debate around it. And what they've done is they've created a situation where they've made the debate about left-wing tactics. So, Charles Murray or Milo Yiannopoulos or Richard Spencer to a lesser degree, or Christina Hoff Sommers goes to a campus and they get all this news coverage and none of it says anything about what they believe. And so they end up being able to sort of look like a sympathetic figure in this. And I think, we should really on the left think about what we're doing to contribute to this. And in the article, I'm clear about, I think it may sound on this podcast like I'm blaming the Note platform people exclusively, and I'm really not. I think that, people like Jonathan Chait and other like hand-wringing liberals who don't acknowledge that this is a direct troll and act like there's actually a real problem here are equally to blame.
So I've heard this kind of thinking before from some other people. So I remember, all this stuff, it's been a little while since it's been in the public consciousness as much as it was when it first, got started. But I remember back, in the thick of all of this, Ann Coulter was going to go and speak somewhere. And there was some talk among some leftists that she was only doing it specifically to get the leftists riled up so that she could, call herself a martyr. She wasn't actually even interested in going to speak at this campus. That wasn't her goal. Do you agree with that their goal is not even to go and to push their agenda in the speeches, but just to go and again, paint themselves as the free speech martyrs, and if they get kicked off of campus or if they get their speech canceled, then that's even better, because then they can say, look at these left wingers who are so intolerant. And is there any evidence we have of that? Do we have any emails or these prominent right-wing figures, on interviews or anything saying that this is their tactic?
Well, it depends on who you're talking about. I mean, I think of Charles Murray and Christina Hoff Sommers as people that really do probably engage a little bit more and enjoy, as the no platform people argue, they actually do see value in just getting the kind of prestige of spreading their ideas from an academic platform. So I think that that's a little different with those two. But then when you look at someone like Milo Yiannopoulos, right, not only is that is obviously what he's doing. And my evidence for this is that last summer, he scheduled an event at Berkeley and made a big, the group that invited him suddenly formed overnight. Like literally, I think they filed their paperwork to be a group like a few days before they invited him,
Suspicious.
Yeah. And
this was his free speech week that he made a big deal out of, right?
Right, yeah.
And then he announced a big slate of speakers that were going to be invited, and then soon it was discovered that many of them had not even gotten an invitation in the mail. And then there were some interesting shenanigans where he tried to book what was literally like the biggest venue, like it's a concert-sized venue on campus, right? Like the kind of place that speakers never ever book, unless they're like a very famous stand-up comedian or something. And this is a very difficult space to book. It costs a lot of money, and he and the group kept dicking around and failing to meet deadlines, and the university kept extending the deadlines, and they kept not meeting the deadlines to get their security deposits and paperwork in. And eventually the university had to be it's a week away and this is our biggest venue. No. And the university bent over backwards. They never do this for anybody else. But as soon as they said, no, if you don't pay for the space, you don't get the space, right? Milo immediately ran to Facebook and started screaming about how he was being censored.
Yeah, I mean, just you talking about that sparked the memory of the whole Ann Coulter thing. It was a similar situation. She wanted to come and speak, and she was supposed to speak in this specific venue on the campus, and they weren't able to get enough security in there, or they wouldn't be arranged properly. So they wanted to cancel that event and move it to a different time so that she could speak in a different venue. And of course, she spins the narrative to, oh, my talk's been canceled. These leftists don't want to hear my right-wing ideas.
And Richard Spencer, I have zero doubts that he 100% believes his white identity stuff, but he is pretty transparent about the tactic of trying to provoke a response. There was something in the marketing for his tour that was he'll debate your favorite feminist professor, make the SJWs cry, and wrestle the Jimmies of the campus, if not the world. That was actually part of his tour announcement. So they're obviously playing into this stuff. And so what makes it difficult for me is that I have very little, if any, faith that an honest debate on the merits of the ideas does a ton of good, right? Because lots of people tried that and we still elected Trump. And so I don't disagree necessarily that, the massive protests and the disruption and all that. I don't necessarily disagree that that's playing into the hands of what they're going after. But at the same time, these guys really are preaching super harmful stuff, and in some ways they're winning. And so that, that leaves me conflicted with what to do. And the radical leftist in me says well, let them whine. We have to stop them from doing what they're doing, and we'll figure out the rest later. But I also don't think you're wrong about, playing into the narrative. And I'm not sure what to do with that.
Well, and I agree with you. They need to be met. And here's the thing. I think the way to unlock a lot of this, and the way I think often what unlocks these confusing issues for me is to kind of put myself in the right wing shoes a little bit, not like morally, but to think about it the way they're thinking about it. And I think it's important to, I feel that they know on some level, they don't want to debate either, right? Like they say they want to debate, but they are quite aware that debates don't actually work. The notion that rational discourse is how we hammer these things out. Um, I don't think that they think that that's true, and I think they realize that emotional, theatrics are a much better strategy. So, when our side says, well, we need to do emotional theatrics because debate doesn't work, they're also doing that. And so I think we have to sort of understand it from that perspective and then think, okay, well, how do we troll the trolls, right? And, I look at what Berkeley did, and I think they really nailed it. Like, they stuck the landing with Milo. They went out, they fanned their PR really hard with the press. They shared documents with the press. They showed their side. They got ahead of the story. They let Milo have his stupid event, and no one showed up. He got bored and he left, you know? I think what's critical here, and I think what I mentioned in the article, was what worked in this case was both sides of this debate realized what was going on and worked together in terms of, like, on the left. The, like, hand-wringing liberals who are just like, but freedom of speech, admitted that that's not actually an issue. And they stayed out of it, right? And the sort of no platforming left admitted they were being trolled and decided to stand down. And by working together, they made Milo look like an idiot.
Well, I see that, but then I think about, Richard Spencer. He's canceling events and specifically himself citing. I mean, this isn't like he canceled some stuff and the left is painting their narrative onto it. I mean, he specifically cites Antifa protests as the reason why his events, he says, they're not fun anymore. And, those organized protests. And he's like, I can't do this stuff publicly anymore. And so it's pretty hard for me to argue against the pretty obvious effectiveness of that.
Yeah, and I agree that they need to be met with protest. I guess I wasn't clear about that. I do think they need to be met with protest. I just think that it really thinks that it's about the kind of protest that you meet them. It certainly is true. And I've talked to a lot of experts, especially about hate speech, about this, and there's a lot of diversity in how they feel like you should deal with this. But every time you talk to the people at Southern Poverty Law Center, for instance, they will be the first to tell you that while they don't agree with a lot of Antifa's tactics, they do agree with Antifa that you should always meet these hate speech events with protest. They just argue that you have to kind of do it in the boring way, which is like outside of the venue.
Yeah, I don't know that accomplishes anything. And like, I mean, I'm not an expert, and I am perfectly willing to be told that I'm wrong. But I see, like, let's create a square where all these protesters can stand and yell and everybody gets to go about their business and nothing gets disrupted. To me, that defeats the purpose of protest.
Well, it's not that. I mean, I get what you're saying. What it is like, so what a lot of these right wingers are trying to do is, like you said, I think that it is too simple to say they're simply trolling. They're also trying to assert that they are speaking for the community, right? They want to either look like they have academic credentials, or they want to look like they're speaking for the community. So if they're not met with protest, they can convey that message even if they don't get to play the martyr, right? So you are accomplishing something by getting out there, and even if you aren't trying to engage them, which I think we all agree engagement does not work. If you're simply like there in the messages, this is hate, the community does not agree, I think that does accomplish derailing their other goal.
And obviously it's a matter of degree, right? Because, like, if John McCain shows up to speak somewhere, like, I might show up and hold some signs, but, like, whatever. But that's obviously not the same thing as, Milo Yiannopoulos, who outs a trans student during his talk. Like, if somebody runs on stage, grabs the mic and punches that guy in the face, like in that specific thing, like, I don't know that I can argue against that, because I mean, he's doing something that's putting someone in in near direct harm's way. And so, it's hard for me to know where to draw that line. And I think, and this is a soapbox that I've gotten on a couple of times, so I'm not going to make a long rant of it, but I think there's often a misunderstanding that, like, we're not, when people do, massive disruption like that, I don't think that anybody is really under the illusion that that's going to win hearts and minds. I think the purpose there is to stop whatever perceived harm is being done. And then, the battle of ideas can take place elsewhere. And, the way that I see it, like, I mean, if you disagree with that tactic, okay, like I said, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an expert, like, I'm just a layman who reads a lot. So, but I think there's sort of a fundamental misunderstanding of the tactic there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that particularly like the liberal critics of Antifa are doing nobody any favors by dismissing that, and especially the concerns about safety in the community. It's not a surprise to me that the people that tend, like the liberals who tend to hand wring the most about the supposedly illiberal youth, also happen to be privileged white men, right? Straight white men.
Shock.
It's like you can just tell that when you say the safety of the community is important, that they're like whatever and just blow right past that.
Right. Yeah. They don't even think about that, because to them it's all about the ideas, and to some people it's about their actual safety in their life.
Yeah, and I think that's where, for instance, and Matt Iglesias, who's a sort of white guy at Vox, but is definitely on our side, I would say. He had a really good piece about this at Vox, where he really called out both conservatives and their sort of liberals who fall into the trap that they're setting for them, for conflating a bunch of different things under the banner of political correctness, like both no platforming and like heckler's veto tactics, which, are at least arguably illiberal, right? And things like setting up a safe space, having trigger warnings, or things like that, which are the definition of liberalism. They are literally giving people the tools they need to engage the debate as thoroughly as they can, which is the exact opposite of censorship, right? And I think that, this is where maybe I should have spent more time in the piece really calling out liberals for failing to understand that these distinctions are really important, because I think safe spaces, for instance, are an incredibly effective tool to deal with the safety concerns. So Milo Yiannopoulos comes to your campus and you are worried that he's going to be drumming up some unsafe attitudes or, some ugly rhetoric, and like having people on hand who are like actual professionals to help people in the moment, setting up rooms to help people in the moment. I don't see a problem with that at all.
Yeah. And so, I wonder how we win this, because I think a thing that a lot of folks miss is that people like Milo and Richard Spencer and all of these folks, I don't know that they're necessarily convincing new groups of people that these ideas are good. I think what they're doing is emboldening people who kind of already believed it to begin with. And I'm sure there's plenty on all sides, so I'm sure somebody read Jordan Peterson's book and their mind was changed by it or something like that, but I think a lot of this is just sort of the emboldening and the validation of those sorts of, anti-woman, anti-gay, et cetera, feelings. And so we know that engagement doesn't really work. And we know that we can't really necessarily win with the same kinds of emotional appeals that conservatives use, because there's so much talk about like why there are so many conservative talking heads that are so good at drumming their audiences up. And apparently folks on the left have trouble doing that. I mean, we have like Jon Stewart, and like, he's not even really a perfect example, you know? And so I wonder, sometimes I worry that it's a matter of scale, because we're talking about people who are the majority, you know, white, straight, cis men. And, you know, even if we got everyone who's not a white, straight, cis guy on our side, like, I don't know that that's enough, right? Because I don't know that there's enough of us. And so I mean, I'm just kind of at a loss at how to win this conversation.
The rest of us are the majority of the population by far. I mean,
well,
white,
that's true, but
straight men are like 25% of people at most.
You're right about that. I guess I should have said that those are the people with the power.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when you talk about, like, when we're talking specifically about the campus issue, I agree with you. Like, Milo, what his entire shtick is that he appeals to the 18, 19-year-old gamer gator type, right? That just, you know, who's decided that, like, he's 18 or 19, and so he's got the same setbacks that every 18 and 19-year-old has. They're like, can't get laid, have no money, right?
Right.
But he's decided that he's a beta male and that feminism is to blame because it's easier than accepting that it's just not your time yet, dude. And the psychology of that, I think, is important to sort of think about here, because Milo is kind of recruiting. I do think a lot of those young men are kind of on the verge. Like, they could either just be little shitbirds for a few more years and then they'll probably turn. It's just, I happen to know a lot of men that like went through a phase like that and then came out the other side, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But that's because they didn't have a Milo Yiannopoulos in their life to sort of turn them to the dark side. So I do think there is some salvation possibility here, but what they get off on, and they're very open about this, is triggering the libs, right? Oh, I love to trigger the libs. So they view an angry reaction as a win for themselves that makes them feel powerful. So I do think that there's value in thinking about denying them that, you know, that emotional gratification.
That was something that I pulled out of the article. Really, the main point I thought that you were trying to get at, and correct me if I misunderstand anything or you want to, you know, phrase it differently than the way that I put it here, just from what I've read. But it was kind of, you know, we're falling right into their trap. You know, they want us to get angry, they want us to get upset, they want us to get violent, and when we do that, you know, we automatically lose, and they get to go back to their base and to their fans and say, hey, look, you know, look at these violent, intolerant liberals. And the quote that I pulled out from there that really struck me was, the way you win the game is to refuse to play. And I thought, well, that's one way of thinking of it. But another way of thinking of it is that that's a forfeit. Like, you're automatically letting them win because you're just not even trying. You know, if you in sports, if the other team doesn't show up, that's not a win. That's a forfeit.
That's fair. And I was talking to Dave Nywert, who has a really good book called Alt America about this, and he's an investigator for the SPLC, and he goes to a lot of these Antifa neo-Nazi clashes to sort of report on them. He was at the one the Milo speech where the guy got shot, right?
Yeah.
And I asked him, how, you know, because he's very much like us, I think, in the terms of he feels that a toe-to-toe meeting of these people has to sort of happen, right? And I asked him, how do we do this better then? How do we do this better? Because I also believe that we need to emotionally satisfy our side too, and we fail if we don't do that. And he told me years ago he was at he went to cover a neo-Nazi rally. He wasn't at a neo-Nazi rally, but he was covering it. And this group of people showed up dressed as clowns and literally just spent the entire rally just goofing on these guys. Like, every time they'd say white power, they would throw flour in the air and go, white flour. And like, they were honking horns and playing like goofy instruments and making puns, and the neo-Nazis just kept getting madder and madder, and they didn't know what to do, and they finally just kind of broke away and went home. And I think that's a tactic that we maybe should consider more. Like they are clowns, maybe call them out on it.
Yeah, I am 100% for doing what works. But my first thought with a tactic like that is just that it fails to take what they do seriously. Because if we were just talking about these ideas in a vacuum and people just saying things, then like, yeah, that's ridiculous. Let's call it what it is. Let's make fun of them and dismiss them. Right. But like these people really do kill people. And I think we risk letting go of the seriousness of what they do and what they're preaching, so that's, again, if it works, it works. And it's not about what feels good to me. It's about what works. Right. But that's my fear with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I hear you. I mean, I will say I've seen people do tactics like that before as well, and I never felt like they weren't taking it seriously. The fact that you showed up, the fact that you put your body on the line, and the fact that you got in a neo-Nazi's face and honked a horn,
right,
shows that you're not kidding around, even as you're making fun of them. And so I do think there is that piece of it.
Yeah, that's fair. And I've told the story on the show before about, why, because I used to be one of those people that's like, well, if you show up to counter protest, you're giving them the attention they want. Like, just ignore them and they'll go away. Like that bullshit advice that a bunch of parents always give their kids about bullies in school. And of course, like that, it doesn't work that way. But like when I was far more ignorant than I am now, I was that person. And I read the story about this guy who shows up to protest Westboro Baptist Church. And his thing was like, imagine being a gay kid on the way home from school and seeing all of this stuff and seeing literally no one stand up to say no. And the part of the story I may not have told is that this guy's method of protest was putting on one of those like Halloween horse heads and just dancing around the protesters the entire time. And that was the way that he protested Westboro Baptist Church. and yeah, so I guess I don't.
Yeah, I think there's different ways to do it. If that doesn't feel right to you, I do think like just showing up and trying to talk to curiosity seekers about your views is a very nice, very noble, very earnest, and very serious way to counter protest, right? If being a clown is not your thing,
right?
I think that there's different ways. I just think that literally the only thing that's ever going to give them the martyr narrative that they want is anything that smacks of actually shutting them down, and then they can pretend they wanted a debate and were denied it, right? And that I think that's where, like, again, Matt Iglesias was right to say, like, liberals need to demand and hold ourselves accountable for being very clear about these distinctions as well.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Are you aware of any actual like social science research that's been done around this stuff? Like, I imagine that would be an incredibly hard thing to research, but there's got to be people who have asked that question in a scientific context.
That's a good question. The closest I can think of is there's been some psychological research into trolls, right? Mm-hmm. And the thing is that research really, but this is all online stuff, right?
Right.
And that research demonstrates that they are highly motivated by sadism. And so, the perception that they're hurting somebody else's feelings gets them off. And especially if they've categorized you as a lib that's easily triggered or whatever. And that's the only thing I can think of. But I find that very interesting that the majority of people that are trolling online rank really high on what they call the dark tetrad of personality traits, like narcissism, sociopathy, sadism, that kind of thing.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not surprising.
No. No, and I think that's where we struggle, though, because it's very hard for someone like you or me to think about it from their point of view because they don't think like us.
Well, yeah. Right. And And part of the problem is, I mean, that's how human beings are wired, right? Like I'm a person of relative privilege, and through the 3 years of having these conversations online and stuff like that, I've developed somewhat of a thick skin. Like it's the random troll comment, regardless of how bad it is, doesn't necessarily get to me. The first time I posted something on YouTube naively, looking at the comment section, like that stung a little bit. But I mean, human beings largely are wired this way, right? I mean, some of us aren't as social creatures as others are. And so, I hear what you're saying, and I don't think you're wrong. And I hear what Ari's saying about what if we disengage, then we're kind of handing them a victory anyways. And largely, I think to avoid that, that's what a lot of folks end up having to do is like, I just can't be on Twitter anymore. Like I can't take another Jordan Peterson fanboy. I just can't do it, And I don't know. I think maybe like so many other things, it's on the privileged folks who, for whom this can be a battle of ideas, who, I'm not debating my actual humanity. I'm debating someone else's humanity. So there's maybe a little bit less weight, and I have more of an ability to engage. I guess it's more on allies to make sure that we're doing what we can to engage in those fights than to emotionally obligate the people who are actually vulnerable. Like that's a horribly, horribly imperfect and incomplete solution, but it's the only thing that I can think of off the top of my head.
Well, and I would take it even a step further and ask people that want to be good allies to stop talking about as if engagement in a debate is something that works, right?
Yes.
I look at a lot of the liberal types that have fallen into this right-wing trap, and the reason they do, I think, is blindness, privilege blindness to a large extent, but also, they've bought this notion that it tickles their brain to be, they love hearing a right winger saying, I just wanted a rigorous debate of the ideas, and they take that on face value, which is stupid. And so I really want people to stop doing that. And I think that would, I feel like a lot of this debate kind of focuses on asking the no platform people to step down. But I really, really want to emphasize that I also want the liberals who scold the no platform people to step down as well, because they are being baited and they are being trolled and they are being played for fools. I think that they should take that time and spend it both pointing out that campus free speech, college kids are actually more supportive of free speech than ever before, first of all. And second of all, pointing out that these right wingers are there to troll, bait, and not engage in a debate, that they have no intention of doing so.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the very least, it's super important that we're debating the right topics, and very much calling out that all the evidence that we have says that no, college kids are actually more in favor of free speech, and that being in college makes you more likely to be in favor of free speech. So the premise of that argument is null and void from the get-go. And then if we want to have the debate around the tactics about these certain specific situations, cool, let's have that debate. But one, it's got to be framed on the basis of knowing that there is no free speech crisis on college campuses. And two, we have to honestly understand the motivations of the people who are trying to engage and their strategies, right? Because I take them at face value that white nationalism, anti-feminism, white supremacy, all of that, I take them at face value that these are the ideas that they believe in and preach, but they are very much engaging in trolling tactics to do that. And I do think that's something we have to be aware of and cognizant of when we decide how we're going to engage. And I think there's a healthy debate to be had about the specific tactics, but I think, before we have that debate, we have to frame it properly. And I think that's so much what I appreciated about reading that article is I just thought to myself, wow, I don't know if I necessarily agree with every conclusion, but I feel like it's at least starting from a better place than so many of these debates do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think, what you say to me too is I think it's critical for everyone to realize that there's no dichotomy between trolling and means it, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Al Franken's left the Senate in disgrace, but he was not wrong when he said kidding on the square was a like his phrase "kidding on the square" is a right-wing tactic, right? Where they're like, "I'm joking," but they're not joking, right? And I think we need to understand about trolling as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we finish up here, I know you got a book coming out too, and I know a lot of this sort of is at least adjacent to the stuff that's in your book. So I want to give you a chance to plug that too. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, it's called Troll Nation. And the sort of idea behind it is like a kind of taking what we're talking here, but like looking at the nation writ large. I argue that the American right has run out of ideas, that they've lost the debate over culture war. And so they've really been reduced to sort of just trolling, that their entire ethos is if it pisses off the liberals, it's the right thing to do. So I turned that into a book somehow.
I mean, I imagine there could be volumes on the subject. So, and I'll put a link. You can pre-order it. I will put a link in the show notes for anyone who is interested. So Amanda, thank you so much for coming on the show and for discussing all of this. I think this is a super important conversation that a lot of people are having badly, and I feel like we at least scratched the surface of doing a good job with the conversation here. So I appreciate that.
We didn't make Amanda cry, so I don't think we won.
Well, thank y'all. This has been great.
That, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto. If you think what we do here is important, please share this around to your friends. Search the Gaytheist Manifesto on Facebook and Twitter to find us there. I am at GaytheistCallie on Twitter. You can email us at podcast@thegaytheistmanifesto.com. And does Ari have a thing?
Ari does have a thing.
Well, let's hear Ari's
today,
thing.
I've been playing a game with Jeremiah, and no, it's not what you're thinking. It's not that kind of a game. It could be, but it's not. So part of this game, I won't give the whole thing away because I want you guys to friend me on Facebook and look at my post about this and decide if this is something that you think you could benefit from. But one big part of the game is that if somebody compliments you, and this game is not going to work for narcissists, but it will work for people like me and Jeremiah. If somebody compliments you, what you do is you are not allowed to deny it, deflect it. You're not allowed to ignore it. You have to accept the compliment and say thank you and express gratitude for their compliment. Wow, what a concept. It's good for your self-esteem. So I thought I'd like to try that out here, but the problem is we have so many different, listeners. What could I say to compliment all our listeners that would apply? So I came up with a list of compliments that I think would apply to almost everybody out there. And I'd like you to listen to these, take them in, really feel them in your heart. And if you would like to, you can friend me on Facebook, email me, aristillman4@gmail.com, and just give your thanks for this compliment and maybe give me a compliment. But please don't. But, I mean, if you have to, okay. The first compliment I have is, that thing you did, that was so good. Oh my God. Wow, look at that thing. That right there is a good thing, I tell you what. I bet you're a person with qualities. Some of them are probably good. That's awesome. My dog would lick the heck out of you. And I'm not just saying that because she'd lick most people. She would lick you extra good because of how great you are. Your star sign is my favorite one. People born at that time of the year that you were born at have the personalities that I like, and you are definitely one of them. Oh my God, you're cis? I couldn't even tell. You know what? I don't know you very well, but you seem like the kind of person who would have a 40% chance of helping someone in danger if there were other people around, which would result in a diffusion of responsibility and the bystander effect. But if you were the only one there, it would be more like 44%. I bet you that there is at least one physical attribute about you that at least one person you've met finds sexually attractive. And finally, you're not beans.
If you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/thegaytheist manifesto. Make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. And if you can't do that, you can still head to iTunes, give us a 5-star rating, and share us around to your friends. It all helps and it all makes a difference. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.